What's up and welcome to my review of the Asus ROG Strix the second GL504 GS DS74 Scar Edition. LOL. Right off the bat, we've got something for Asus to work on. Get a new naming system that makes sense. This thing is a direct competitor to the likes of the GS65 Stealth, the Razer Blade 15, and the slightly thicker Aorus X5. This is a premium gaming laptop. It's got this nice textured edge here. It is also a bit thicker than those ultra thin and light laptops, but because it is thicker, it's able to support a little bit better components. Now this machine comes with a GTX 1070 with 8 gigs of GDDR5, an i7-8750H, 16 gigs of RAM, 256 gig SSD, as well as a 1 terabyte hard drive. And of course, we have a 1080p 144Hz IPS level high refresh rate display. Now this 1070 model comes at a base price of $2,000, which is competitive with the likes of the GS65 Stealth. The Razer Blade 15 is a little bit more expensive than this, and something like the Aorus X5 is also going to be a bit more expensive. So this is a fairly decently priced model when you especially compare against those ultra high end. So in my mind, the main laptop to compare this with is the GS65 Stealth. Now, one very important thing to consider right now is whether or not you should even be in the market for a gaming laptop, because the desktop NVIDIA graphics cards are out right now, and that means that the laptop graphics cards are probably around the corner in the next few months. So my take on it is this: if you have a laptop or a desktop that you can use in the meantime and it's not a big deal, you're not desperate to upgrade, then don't worry about it. But if you really need a gaming laptop right now, then it's not a terrible idea to buy, because the existing graphics cards, the 1060, 1070, and 1080 are fantastic graphics cards, and they pretty much crush all games as it is right now. So yes, if you wait, you will always eventually get a better product, but the product we have available right now is already sufficient for the next 2 to 3 years of gaming. Now, I'll be breaking down everything about this laptop, from design to usability to ports to overclocking potential and performance, especially when it comes to the CPU. Its thermal management, does this thing throttle? Now, I want to say up front that HID Evolution has provided this laptop for me to review, but I'll be sending this back to them. Now, if you were to order this unit from HID Evolution, this one has had a few upgrades. This one's got upgraded cooling on the GPU and CPU. They removed the initial CPU place and put thermal grizzly conductinaut on this guy, which should improve cooling for long-term gaming sessions and hopefully prevent thermal throttling. They've also added thermal pads, color calibrated the screen, and also selected this particular unit to minimize backlight bleed. They also reinstalled Windows for a completely clean install. All of that said, this is in no way sponsored by HID Evolution, and I will be just as harsh on this laptop as I would be on any other. Now, I just want to talk to you, the viewer, for just a moment. If you're looking for unbiased and honest tech reviews, that is what I'm all about on this channel. I am always doing my best to look out for you, the consumer, and what you might need or want in a tech product. So if you're looking for those kinds of tech videos, hit that subscribe button right now, tap the notification bell, and smash that like button. Let's get into this review. Now, it's clear to say that this laptop was designed for a gamer from the ground up. From its backlit keyboard with see-through WASD keys, to its camo pattern, to the high-performance components included inside. Now, not everyone's gonna love this design, but I think a ton of people will. One particular design aesthetic that I love is the LED strip along the front. And of course, one of the main draws to this laptop is its essentially bezel-less display. Of course, it has a big bezel along the bottom, and because of how they designed this laptop, it's a lot less rectangular than most laptops out there. It's actually almost a square, and that's because they've made it so narrow and they've extended it out to be able to fit those high-end components in this machine. The main thing to keep in mind with the size is that it might not fit into certain 15-inch laptop backpacks or sleeves, so you might have to get a little bit specialized or go to a 17-inch laptop or backpack to be able to fit this guy comfortably inside. That also has this really cool Asus light-up logo on the back, and the back of the screen feels good with an all-metal design. Overall, the hinge feels solid. You move it there and it stays. I love that. You can also open the laptop with one hand. Now, as far as ports go, on the left, we have a combination headphone mic port, a USB-C without Thunderbolt 3, 2 USB Type A's, an HDMI port, a display port, a LAN port, and finally the power port. On the right side, we have a full-size SD card slot, one more USB 3 Type A, and a Kensington lock port. Now, Now that's a good amount of ports for a 15-inch laptop, especially one with this small of an overall profile. The only major thing this thing lacks is that Thunderbolt 3, which would allow for external GPUs and a little bit more future-proofing. Overall, I really like the design of this laptop. The only way that I think it could be improved is if they used a all-metal body instead of this material. I mean, this material is not bad, and I'm sure there's people out there that would prefer to have this type of material on their laptop, but me personally, I like an all-metal chassis. I think it's the best, it's the classiest, it's the most durable that's available out there. All right, let's talk performance. We benchmarked this sucker in a whole bunch of games and benchmarks. Now, one thing you should know is that we always undervolt the processor by 100 millivolts. These new 6-core processors, pretty much all of them can be undervolted by 100 millivolts. And if you're not undervolting your laptop, you're missing out on a bit of performance, especially if your laptop might be thermally throttling. For our run through Tilted Towers, we averaged 113 FPS. In PUBG, we have a mixture of low and ultra settings, and we managed to average 129 FPS. In Overwatch, we averaged 126 FPS. Far Cry 5 on all maximum possible settings managed 83 FPS, and The Witcher 3 on ultra settings managed 77 FPS. The overall gaming experience on this laptop is going to be fantastic, but I will say that if you really want to take advantage of that 144 Hz screen that this thing has, you're gonna need to lower the settings to medium or high to really pump the frame rate up to that 144 FPS mark. Of course, that's gonna depend largely on which titles you're actually playing. Now for our Cinebench loop, again, we've undervolted the processor by 100 millivolts, and we've also raised the short and long power limits of the processor to over 100 so that the CPU can take as much power as it needs to run at maximum performance. And the great thing here is that we managed 3.9 gigahertz across all 6 cores consistently with no throttling whatsoever in a loop. After 10 consecutive runs, we managed to only hit 74 degrees Celsius, which is just fan-freaking-tastic. So if you're looking to edit and render video, this thing is going to be a beast with no throttling whatsoever. Now, its score of 1220 is quite good. It's not quite as good as the highest end laptops right now that can hit closer to 1400, like the Aorus X7 V8, which is my personal laptop, but it does score quite a bit better than the GS65 Stealth that throttled down to 930. That's about a 30% performance gain with the exact same hardware because this thing isn't as thermal and power limited. Now, when you look at the performance of these laptops with 3D Mark Firestrike Ultra, you can see the power of a full-fledged GTX 1070. The Strix 2 with the full-fledged 1070 managed to get 4354. The Razer Blade 15 with the Max Q 1070 managed 3692, and the GS65 Stealth managed just a little bit over 3400, while the Razer Blade Pro with a full-fledged GTX 1060 managed 2600. Now, as far as thermals go, in Far Cry 5, which I think is currently the most demanding game out there as far as demanding something from both the CPU and GPU and really taxes a laptop's ability to cool itself, the laptop managed to prevent thermal throttling in our tests so far, but it did reach 87 degrees, so if you're in a warmer room, you might actually be thermal throttled with this thing. Or on the other hand, if you were to buy a laptop without the thermal cooling upgraded, you would likely run into thermal throttling in a game like Far Cry 5. Now, other games that aren't as demanding on the CPU and GPU and aren't as optimized like PUBG, you're probably not going to run into any thermal throttling at all, but it's hard for me to say since I don't have an unupgraded unit for me to test. Overall, the display on this thing is fantastic. It's got good viewing angles. It is a very bright and colorful display with minimal backlight bleed. Because it's a 144 Hz display, it had very minimal input lag and very little ghosting. It's not going to be quite as good as a desktop 144 Hz or 240 Hz monitor in terms of input lag and ghosting, but this is as good as it gets in mobile gaming at this point. Now, there is one set of users that might want to steer clear of this display, or really 144 Hz displays in general, and that is creative types. For those types of users, I would recommend looking into 4K panels with higher color gamuts, higher contrast ratios, and a brighter overall display. Now, the touchpad on this thing is responsive. It's incredibly silky smooth. It feels great to touch, but it is a smaller trackpad, partially because it utilizes tactile buttons on the trackpad rather than including them underneath the touchpad surface. Like, I love the way that Apple and Razer do the touchpad because it doesn't feel mushy. It still feels great and very responsive, but a lot of manufacturers out there aren't making the best touchpad buttons underneath the surface, and these are definitely more reliable and a lot easier to get used to. That said, I do wish the trackpad was a little bit larger. Now the keyboard on this bad boy is really good. It feels a little bit soft because of the texture of the keys. I prefer a little bit more clicky feel to the keys, but I think most users will really like it. Now this thing has some noticeable standouts. I really like the volume and mic mute keys as well as the Asus ROG software launch here. Despite the narrow profile, Asus managed to fit in a full numpad as well as these arrow keys. Now these arrow keys I think are positioned a little bit awkwardly, but once you get used to them, they work just fine. Now the speakers on this guy are really good for a 15-inch laptop, especially one this thin and light. Now, because it's not an ultra thin, they were able to squeeze in a bit better speakers, and the speakers are located on the left and right side, so you do get a little bit of left-right audio separation, which is nice. Now, these speakers do get pretty loud. I wouldn't say they're the loudest 15-inch laptop speakers or the best 15-inch laptop speakers I've ran into, but they are still quite good. Now, as far as battery life goes, this thing has a 66 watt-hour battery, which is really not that big considering how thick this thing is. For example, the Razer Blade 15 has an 80 watt-hour battery, which is quite a bit bigger. And to top this off, this thing does not support NVIDIA Optimus or have G-Sync, so I think that's kind of a double negative. Most manufacturers opt for either G-Sync or Optimus, but in this case we have neither, which is I think an overall pretty big drawback. And since this guy doesn't have NVIDIA Optimus, that means you're relying on the full-fledged GTX 1070 Deering battery, which is going to completely eliminate all-day battery life. Even if you do maximum possible power savings with Wi-Fi off and Bluetooth off, you're probably looking at a little bit over 3 hours as a maximum battery life potential. If you take this thing to the coffee shop to do some web browsing, you're probably looking at around 2 to 2.5 hours depending on your settings, and under maximum load we're looking at a little bit over 1 hour. So can I recommend this machine? Yes, absolutely. It is a great overall machine, but if you're looking for a machine that's more portable, that has longer battery life, then I would definitely recommend looking at something like the GS65 Stealth or the Razer Blade 15 instead of this guy right here. Of course, another option would be the Aorus X5 V8. It has a little bit better battery life, but it has a little bit larger footprint because it doesn't have a bezel-less display. Overall, the major drawbacks for this device are its slightly increased size when compared to those ultra-thin gaming laptops, as well as its lower battery life. Besides those two things, I think it's a fantastic overall machine and definitely worth a look if you're interested in buying a laptop in late 2018. And that's it for my review of the Asus ROG Strix 2 GL504 GS hyphen some other numbers and letters. It doesn't matter. Link in the description if you want to check out one of these bad boys or pick one of them up. And of course, if you do decide to pick one of them up through that link, it does go to help support the channel, which is much appreciated. We'll see you guys in the next one. Brandon out.